Welcome to the Grow Strong Leaders podcast. I'm your host, Meredith Bell, and I interview business leaders who are committed to their own growth and the development of everyone on their team. If you enjoy my podcast, be sure to subscribe and rate it on your favorite podcast platform. Welcome back to another episode of the Grow Strong Leaders podcast. If you've ever gone through a major transition from one career path to another one that's totally unfamiliar, you may have felt disoriented and unsure of your identity. And that's often what happens to college and professional athletes when they leave the sport that's been a central part of their identity. My guest today specializes in helping these athletes discover how they can transfer the skills they already have to the business world. You're going to hear ideas that you can apply to your own role as a leader. I'm very excited to welcome to my show, Jay Dixon. Hi, Jay.
Hey, Meredith. Thanks for the warm intro. I'm excited to be here.
Well, I'm just so excited about our conversation. I've been looking forward to it ever since reading your book, which I'll mention here in just a minute. First, I want to give a big thank you to our mutual friend, Damon Limby, for introducing us. He knows the right chemistry to put together, and that was surely the case here. So thanks to Damon.
Absolutely. Thank you, Damon. Absolutely.
Yes. Let me just tell my audience a little bit about you before we start with our conversation. Jay is an expert at the intersection of sports and business. He was a student athlete at the University of Nevada, where he played football. Since then, he's co-founded 3 companies, and he's consulted or participated in more than 50 transactions. After all these experiences, Jay started an elite accelerator for athletes called successcoach.com. It blends the mindset strategies of elite CEOs and an actionable playbook to transition their athletic talents into thriving business ventures. And he's the author of a new book, which I have right here and have read all the way through, called After the Game, Bridging the Gap from Winning Athlete to Thriving Entrepreneur. It's an excellent book for anyone in business. So I want to highly recommend it, not just if you were a former athlete, but anyone in business can benefit from these concepts and practical ideas that Jay has brought into the book. Is told in a very interesting story form. So Jay, let's talk about your own journey, because you came into this business that you're in now from your own experiences. So what happened to you when you were transitioning from athlete to what's next?
Yeah. And you're right. It's like a kaleidoscope of experience just kind of came together and brought this idea into, a business. So what sparked it was pain, Meredith. To be honest, was pain. Was that loss of identity you mentioned earlier at the intro of the show, when I finished playing sports. And for me, it was difficult in a period of my life where you ask yourself, who am I? Am I good enough? What do I do? Where do I go? Where's the playbook? The heck's this world all about? What am I doing here? Right. And that identity gap's a real thing, and something that you fast forward from that pain point to, almost 20 years later, and I could finally go through all the research and dive into it. I found that I wasn't alone, and that over 90% of former athletes at the collegiate and professional Olympic sports suffer from this identity gap. And so, like you mentioned, business leaders, suffer from it when you transition or you're looking for new jobs. But there's a common group of folks in our world, but we'll focus here in the United States. That's where all our studies are. They're called athletes, that we know they're going to suffer this identity gap, right? And we can kind of pick and choose when it's going to happen. There's certain points that most people's careers end, college, right? And so it's just a mission and a purpose I'm out there to provide a solution for.
We'll talk a little bit more about what your program is all about, but One of the things that was interesting to me, and you saved it for the end, actually in the appendix, was these qualities or the unique advantages, I think you called them, that athletes bring to business. And I would love to explore a few of those with you because I think that's an important thing for my listeners, even who are not athletes. What are some of the things that whatever background they had, whatever they participated in college or whatever preparation, how can they identify these unique advantages that they have? So if you'll talk about some of the ones that athletes have, that might spark people thinking about what am I bringing to the table that's unique?
Yeah, yeah, that's a great question. So I'll start with one that I really enjoy, and it's you look at, so we'll talk about the neuroscience of athletics and what that drives into the brain, and where studies say, it develops parts of the brain. So one I really like is the high metacognition, and that's the ability to it's almost like an imagination, but it's a way to see the next step before you play it, and you feel it, and you can make the decision. So you as a business leader, Meredith, I'm sure you're constantly thinking about, what's next, or as you're growing your business, what's the next step? Hey, I've got this proposal. What do I do? And you're constantly envisioning and how that's going to feel, how it's going to affect your team. And it's a high metacognition. And entrepreneurs tend to have that. Successful entrepreneurs and CEOs tend to have that. And when we look at the brain and what athletics builds in the brain, we can derive that to the neuroscience that athletes, take a sample set of athletes versus non-athletes, they tend to have a super high metacognition rate. So that's the ability to see the game, and you can apply that to business. Some of the other ones that are talked about quite a bit, that I don't like the words, but we can tailor to the neuroscience. Resiliency. You can look at that, and you can look at the limbic system and the amygdala and the hypothalamus of a former athlete, and you can see they've built some more resiliency in them. Leadership's another one. Coachability. So these are all soft skills that a lot of folks out there like to talk about, but we can look at the neuroscience that body movement and playing those games tends to increase the rate of the development of those parts of the brain. So just a few high level ones there, but some neat ones that we know athletics builds in humans.
Well, they are. And, as I think about, and I was going to ask you about metacognition. So I just love that you included that first off, because I think that is fascinating, that ability to anticipate what's going to happen. And based on what you're observing, your ability to kind of see and foresee things really is such an important skill in the business world. So you're not blindsided by something that you weren't expecting because you've kind of had your eyes out on the horizon looking at trends and what might be. I think of it with athletes going into the next game, having studied the opposition and what they do, and then anticipating how am I going to respond if this happens, if that happens. And all of that has application in the business world. So I think that is a really good parallel.
Those are muscles in your brain that you're developing, right? And you hit the nail on the head. That's exactly it right there. So for me, in college, and I started developing this when I was an American football player. I started playing when I was 7 years old. I started, hearing this from coaches when I was young. Hey, see yourself making big plays tomorrow. Hey, tomorrow we're playing this team. See yourself, we've been practicing all week. Make yourself big plays. But then you get to the college level and it becomes real. And those coaches are really telling you, envision yourself making big plays. And here's, on this play, envision yourself doing this. And so these are parts of your brain that you're developing. And you're right that it's so applicable to the business world. And not everyone out there has it. And so that's a unique ability.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it becomes so important, even no matter what someone's role is in an organization, if you're a business owner or you're a leader of a team or of a whole company, that ability to think about impact of decisions on others. And you had mentioned too, they have the athletes, because of that development, have the ability to make decisions quicker and even better than someone who hasn't developed that skill.
Yeah. Yeah. And so we can look at, some of the numbers that back that up as well. So you look at when an athlete owns a company or is a CEO of a company, they utilize 12% less debt on the business. So there's something there. Why are their decisions? Why do they utilize less debt? Why are they making more income? There's all these grand numbers that show athletes as leaders do great jobs. Um, but we can, if you tailor it back to making quicker decisions that are more accurate, you can tailor it into a lot of those things to business outcomes. So, but you're right, 100%. It's that ability to see the game and see the next step before it's played.
The other thing that to me was a big takeaway that it wasn't said directly, because I know the athletes you're working with are going to eventually either buy or run a company typically. But many athletes who don't aspire to that might not give themselves credit for all the skills that they have developed and they're bringing to the table. And on the flip side, the people who are hiring former athletes, I think your book would help them appreciate the strengths that that person has. And you did make this point very clearly. It's so important to come with those kinds of skills. You can teach the person how to do the mechanics or the technical part of the job. It's much harder to transmit those other skills that they're bringing that they've already developed.
100%. As you were talking, and I'm so happy you said that because it's like you were in my brain. Um, you look at the recruiting side. So the recruiting side, it's very quantitative of what was your last achievement? What was your last achievement? What was the greatest thing you did? Um, but one quote I like to say is I went back to Columbia Business School because I wanted to study private equity and learn, how do you buy companies and all this stuff. And so the leader of that program, and she's been running the program, this Ivy League private equity program for 20 plus years. And she starts her program off and says, spreadsheets don't create synergies, people do. Right. And so that's big time publicly traded, and small business traded private equity. So she's saying this, Meredith, you're saying this, that, that's the people skills that are important. So there's something common here. You can teach those technical skills.
Mm.
And don't get me started with all this technology going on that's going to take away all these technical skills one day.
Oh, we won't go there. I just want to open the eyes of my listeners who are in a position of bringing people on board to
Yeah,
consider the kinds of advantages that the person may have rather than looking at, well, do you have experience doing this specific thing? That's not
yeah,
as important as some of those, what we call character skills that they would bring to a position that are more challenging to develop with somebody that doesn't have, say, a strong work ethic, doesn't
yeah.
have the habit of putting in the extra effort, doing whatever it takes to get the job done, that many of the athletes have developed through the course of their whatever sport it is that they've played, because you can't be mediocre to play at
Yeah.
the college or pro level.
Here's an idea, and here's an idea that's in the book. How about a hiring manager, sure, get resumes, but how about you solicit their failure resumes as well, so you can see where they've failed and what they've learned from those mistakes and what they've tried, right? And so there's other ways, maybe you don't see college athlete on there and you can't make this grand assessment of, oh, they have these skills, but maybe there's a failure resume and you can have folks, no matter where they come from. Um,
Talk more about
uh,
that, because I thought that was that was novel to me. I wasn't familiar with that, but I thought a great idea. Flesh that out a little bit more for my listeners.
yeah. So your failure resume is exactly as it sounds. It's all your professional failures um, in life. And so you start from the beginning, just like your resume. And you don't go into your personal failures, but go through your professional failures. You list what it was, and then you list what you learned from it, what actions you've taken from there. And so that's a very powerful mechanism. And one thing We talk about it in the book, but also in our course, when we're training folks through the mindset, is putting together their failure resume. I could care less about, how many years you worked at McKinsey. I care more so about what you learned from when you didn't get that promotion, right? Or when you got fired from your last job, maybe. What'd you learn? How'd you pick back up? Where'd you go next? So those are powerful things.
Yeah, I think too often we're concerned about showing our best selves and not our flaws, our vulnerabilities. And I think that's such a great way because it isn't just listing your failures. The key aspect of it is what did I learn from it? And what have I done differently since that? So that I'm not repeating the same mistakes. I think that would be an important thing to look at. Are we doing the same? Are we having the same failures over and over again with no change in our action steps as a result of that? That would be something of a clue there. So I
Yeah.
think that failing early, failing often, and then getting back up again and learning from it, taking that time is so key. Well, you mentioned the mindset, and of course that is a large chunk of the book, is those 10 mindset elements. And I'd love for you to talk about the one that you chose first to talk about first and why you have it first, which is growth mindset.
Yeah. Um, yeah. Well, to me, I'm glad you picked up on that. It's intentional that it's the first mindset element. So to me, growth mindset is really the bread and butter of it all, of um, where you find the most commonality in successful CEOs and leaders and entrepreneurs. And um, so growth mindset for folks out there that don't understand it or um, don't practice it, or maybe haven't come across it. There's two types of mindset generally in the world. You have a growth mindset and you have a fixed mindset. And so, um, as I mentioned, a lot of these CEOs, folks that are higher up in ranks, will generally have a growth mindset, and that's that ability to, as succinct as I can put it, to continue to push through and to find the joy in the pain almost, and to find the opportunities. And it's that constant ability to grow. And so there's a lot of actionable steps. And I know, we talked through your book, the Connect with Your Team. You could see a lot of steps in there that I think kind of overlap with a great leader with growth mindset, and then that ability to actionably, install that in your team. But that's as succinct as I could put it.
Well, to me, yes. And Carol Dweck has a whole book,
Yeah.
on the distinction between those two. I think, to me, besides thinking of it as being open-minded, it's recognizing where we've put limitations on ourselves and opening up to the possibilities that, oh, I'm not stuck in this way of being or way of doing things. I have the opportunity to choose differently, to grow, to change. And I think part of that whole growth mindset is coming to the realization that we have that choice, that the things we may label ourselves with to limit ourselves, I'm an introvert, an extrovert, I'm no good at follow-up, all of those are just ways of describing ourselves that aren't accurate. They're just our beliefs and our picture of how we are, but in reality, there's so much more. And to me, that's what your book did so well, is these athletes, because I love the fact that it's told in story form. You give your own personal story at the front end, and then it becomes a story where there's a success coach and there are the different participants in the program. And that, and I love the fact that each of the participants comes with a different background, different mindset, belief. And as the success coach helps them open up their minds, they all discover greater possibilities about themselves in different ways that they've limited themselves.
Yeah. Yeah. You made a great point there on an explanation with the understanding of growth mindset. We wrote, or I wrote the book intentionally to have the biggest impact across our world was, in my opinion, was to put it into character form and to tell it in a story so others could dive into those characters and they weren't driven by the way they looked or where they came from or things like that. So I'm glad you enjoyed that as well. So telling it through the story form, hope folks can really pick up some of the principles and some of the feelings that these characters go through and how they change.
Well, I think that's what makes it so powerful, your book, and impactful, because the characters, the two especially that are by name, and they are real people with real challenges. And I think readers will identify with the humanness of their experiences and the challenges they have faced and how they are able to work through those, and the growth that each person experiences going through and learning from each one of those 10 mindset elements. That the next one, I think, or it was one of the next ones, was around self-awareness and emotional intelligence. And I so agree with you about self-awareness being foundational to so many other things, because we can't grow if we're not willing to look within. What has been your experience with the importance of self-awareness, and why do you give it such emphasis?
Yeah. Just to that point earlier, that I do what's called identity mapping, right? And so you can understand who you are, and um, that we change, that we evolve, that knowing who you are is foundational and important to understanding where you're going, but also understanding that changes with time. But that self-awareness for athletes as they're transitioning into the business world is critical, because they're not an athlete anymore. They're not that purely just an athlete anymore. So it's that transition of that identity. And then emotional intelligence. Yeah. So emotional intelligence is another module we talk about in the book. And I actually picked up a lot of synergies on that one with your book, Connect with Your Team, and what I was talking about there. But um, so emotional intelligence, I'm sure everyone out there knows, but emotional intelligence, EQ 2.0, I think is probably the greatest book out there on emotional intelligence. But we talk about that as well in the book. And yeah,
Well, when you
I don't
think
know where I
of,
was going with that one, Meredith.
well, just thinking about, if someone is going to be shifting from whatever it was they were doing before, let's say an athlete, but now they're going to be in this role of leading a company or leading others, that ability to manage themselves and at the same time manage their social interactions. You
Yeah,
gave some good examples in there about what happens if you lose your temper, lose your cool in the heat of a
yeah,
major event going on, versus staying calm, and how everyone else is watching you to read how you're responding to the situation, because they're going to respond in kind.
yeah. And it's like that got me on that train of thought. It's that conflict resolution portion of your book as well, right? And finding that the win-win scenario, right, where it's collaborating and it's understanding
Mhm.
the emotions involved and
Mhm.
how they can affect decisions. And you can start off and be in a lose win position versus a win-win position in a conflict. So
Yes. And there are so many exercises you have throughout with each of these 10 elements of mindset that people can really benefit from if they want to, I would again recommend the book and going through and actually completing some of those because it really requires thoughtful reflection and self-honesty to
You know,
dig deep and look so that you're ready for that next area that that you cover. You have some great ideas in there around time too, and not calling it so much time management, but managing yourself around the time that you have. Are there any tips from that whole area that you think would be useful for my listeners to consider?
yeah, and so we call it energy optimization,
Yes,
right?
that's right.
Um,
That's the phrase.
yeah, yeah. So time, yeah, but you need the time and energy optimization. Um, so that one, there's a lot of great tips in there. One thing I like to point out with readers that haven't read the book is time and energy optimization goes hand in hand with health mastery, and that's how you approach your days, what you do, and how you think. Um, and that can be freeing. That can be freeing. That can change a lot. So I guess to put out one tip out there in energy optimization, it's practice mindfulness and all these modules really go together, Meredith. But
They
yeah, we call
do.
it energy optimization, and as you know, as a leader, it's important. It's important.
Yes. When you think about practicing mindfulness, what does that look like for you when you are doing that?
Yeah, it's looking inside, and it's being ever present in the moment. And it's the ability to calm. We go back again to that um, limbic system and your amygdala, and we go back into the brain. It's that ability to calm that system and be ever present in the moment. And that's so powerful. And even when you get into these micro conflicts and you can feel your energy rising, it's that ability to then focus on your breath quite quickly and bring it back down. And so we're all big science experiments at the end, and we can at the end of the day, one way or another, there are common mechanisms to keep ourselves in check. And so mindfulness, just like that, is you can practice it on your own, but then the ability to practice in the business place and the workspace is quite imperative as well, and do it in those micro moments as well.
Mhm. As I'm listening to, I'm thinking a really good place to start that is if there's an individual at work or at home that tends to trigger you
Yeah.
when they say things that just, hit your buttons. Our kids often can do that. Um, it's my grandkids now that might do that. But just to be, as you say, in that moment and take a breath so that you can focus and give yourself time to respond in an appropriate way rather than reacting and
Yeah.
saying something that you might regret later. And I love that you said we're all, science experiments. One of my favorite images is from, I think it was a Steve Chandler book, where he said, if you think of yourself when you're trying something new as a scientist with a lab coat on and you're running an experiment and you get this data that's a result of the experiment you just ran. In a scientific lab, you don't get emotional about the results. It's just what it is. And so
Ah,
his encouragement was put on your lab coat mentally and see this result that you get simply as data. And what would you like to do with that data? It
I love
removes
that.
the emotion from it. Isn't that a wonderful
I
analogy?
love that. I love that. Yeah, that's fantastic. That is fantastic. One,
That's
one
helped
of
me.
the that's one of the things that's helped me is I came to the understand. I started practicing mindfulness right when I get up in the morning. I understand with my body and the way I work in the world. and a lot of humans, your cortisol levels tend to be higher in the morning. It's your body waking up, and so you have the stress, coming in, and that for a lot of folks, if you're going through, some of these changes, let's say you're going through a career change, you're going through an identity change, whatever that is, that may be a key there is do it first thing in the morning, realizing that, hey, you're going to wake up and your cortisol levels naturally are going to be higher. You've got this extra stress going on, so let's bring it back down right away,
Mm-hmm.
which is a good one. But,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I love your analogy there. That's great.
Not original to me. I want to share with you one of my favorite quotes from your book, just because it's such a deep part of my own thoughts about leadership. The best leaders have a backbone and a heartbeat, and they use both to keep a level head. And I would love for you to talk about that because I think we can get into trouble, when we think of a continuum about a strong backbone or a strong heartbeat, we can sometimes feel like it's either or. But I like the
Yeah.
fact that you're making the case for both, and they can both help us keep a level head. And I would love for you to talk a little bit more about what does that mean to you?
Yeah. Uh, know your value system. What's your value system? Do you have your values card on you every day? Who are you? Is it in your office? What are your values? Do your values align with the company values? Are you guys on the same mission together? Then it shouldn't be hard to make any decisions from there. If you make decisions that are values based and you have those outlined exactly what your values are, I don't have I'm sitting on this now, but I walk around and in my phone, I have one of those cases that holds your credit cards. I have my values card right there, what my values are. I always know. And it makes it easy. You're never making decisions that are purely, you know, profit, which is important as a business leader. But if you go to your values, you'll never make a wrong decision. So
Hmm. I
I
love
would say
that.
that.
Would you share some of the values you have? I'm curious.
Yeah. Being connected with the universe. Um, my joy is my highest value. So I'm
Mm.
constantly seeking ways to get to joy. And families right below that. Being connected with the universe is right below that. Then I kind of go down from there. So but joy is really my highest. Yeah,
Love that. Because when you think about if you feel joy,
yeah,
how can you, if that really is emanating from you, it's coming from within, you
yeah,
can deal with adversity, you can respond appropriately. To me, that's tied to love too.
love.
You're joyful. When you really can be truly joyful, you love yourself and you freely love other people. You don't have to judge them. It's it's enjoying them. That's
Hmm.
what comes to mind when I hear you talk about being joyful.
That's a great one. And then like for me, how do I get there? It's right below that. It's family, being connected to the universe. How do I get there? Well, it's doing the right thing. There's different, very micro values from there, but it's like a family tree, right? You start with your highest one, and then you go down, and how do you get back up there?
Great.
Yeah,
Thank you for sharing that. There was another aspect in one of the chapters, and I forget now which mindset this was connected to, but I am so in alignment with you on this, the idea of expectations versus agreements. And I know that leaders can get in trouble because they have expected something, but they haven't gotten agreement with the other person. And I'd love for you to talk a little bit about the distinction you make between the two of those because it is so vital to getting things done.
yeah. And expectations versus agreements. As you mentioned, can be a backbone. I'm sure, as a lot of your listeners know, of a root of a lot of issues internally with the company. Um, so being actionable in in the communication with your employees of what that expectation is and then what the agreement is. So you start with expectations and then you work your way down into agreements, um, and I just can't express the importance of that, and why it's important for leaders.
Well, it's to me, it was you had it expressed so well too in the book there. You go away with both of you having a clear understanding of what
Yeah,
has been agreed to, as opposed to saying, I want this by Friday. The other
yeah,
person hasn't been able to respond if they're going to be able to do that or not, or maybe they're fearful of speaking up. And so they just wait until the deadline comes and passes and they don't produce. And so there's the
active listening.
surprise and disappointment.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
In thinking about the folks who've gone through your program and they have taken over and have started running businesses, what would you say they're bringing to the table that helps them be more successful? Because you had some statistics that you had shared about, I think it was 15% greater profitability for these folks that are able to go in and be effective almost from day one.
yeah. It's the soft skills. It's the soft skills that are what I do in my entire thesis is called entrepreneurship through acquisition, and that's the ability to go acquire small companies across America. And um, our data says, and this third party research says that former athletes, when they acquire these companies, operate them a 15% higher profit. They stay 17% longer tenured. So we tailor that to resiliency, and then 12% lower debt. Um, and so those soft skills are what we tailor it directly to in operating these companies. One of my favorite quotes is Peter Drucker says, "Culture eats strategy for breakfast." And so we can gamify and teach, whether it's a plumbing company or a media company or whatever that is, we can teach the X's and O's behind operating the business, but we can't teach someone that's going to show up every day. It's going to show up with a good attitude, a growth mindset, that's going to be resilient, that's going to take failures, that's going to put together a failure resume, and that's going to, inspire and lead a team. And so those are not my expertise of teaching. So I just like to source those folks that, tend to have those higher qualities. And so I would say those ones are directly correlated to that outcome, the soft skills.
As I'm listening to describe that, I would guess too that because some of these, and you gave examples, I think you yourself had bought a plumbing company and you didn't know anything about plumbing,
HVAC. Yeah,
right?
HVAC.
And
Yeah.
so thinking about that, it seems to me that CEOs that go in with that kind of mindset, I can learn what I need to know on the technical side, or I hire people that have that expertise. But also, when you're looking at bringing on board strong team members, recognizing those soft skills are really key to look at, and not so much if they know unless you're hiring just for a specific technical skill, like a technician who's got to go in and, put the electrical system together effectively, but someone else that's got more of a leadership role where they don't have to be into the details of that, not
Yeah.
having that technical expertise, but having the people expertise. As you
Yeah.
mentioned, was it Columbia, the person that's head of the
Yeah.
program at
Yeah. The
Columbia,
private
was
equity.
talking
Yeah.
about the people side. Those are much easier if you hire them already, at least somewhat developed, rather than having no awareness of those, the lack of self-awareness, maybe.
Yeah. Yeah. Meredith, the first company I ever started right out of college was an HVAC company because we met a guy that was fixing air conditioners, had the license. I didn't know a darn thing. I just, holy cow, it's hot. I want to start a company. I don't know how to start a company. How does this all work? Hey, do you want to partner with me? Okay, that's great. Let's do this. And right. And it's me operating a team and utilizing those athletic skills to operate a company and inspire a team around me versus, fixing the air conditioner physically myself.
Mhm.
But if I couldn't inspire a team and I couldn't empathize with them, there's no company. There's nothing there, right? There's just technicians fixing air conditioners.
Mhm.
So, yeah, that's those soft skills I think are universal in business.
Mhm. Well, the other thing with that story of your first company is you built it up to be so successful, somebody wanted to buy it fairly quickly after you had grown it, right?
Yeah, I would say that the folks around me did a great job, and um, that was another learning moment because I didn't know you could sell a company at that age. At that time in life, I had no idea, Meredith. So that was a learning process and fantastic one because that gentleman, he and I ended up partnering on a few things from there. So it was great.
Well, to me, this and really everything we've talked about, Jay, uh, comes down to a really important takeaway, which is don't be afraid of trying something new, even if you don't know all the hows when you go into it, because you can learn that. But building up your confidence around the skills that you do bring and giving yourself credit for those as a growth mindset, it all circles back to that
Yeah.
anything is possible. And I know we are really at time, so I'd love for you to share how can people connect with you, get a copy of your book, and learn more about your wonderful program at successcoach.com.
Yeah, yeah. Well, thank you. This was fantastic. I love talking to you, Meredith. This has been wonderful. Successcoach.com, like you mentioned, that's probably the easiest. The book is found on Amazon, Simon and Schuster, book Barnes and Noble. It's called After the Game: Bridging the Gap from Winning Athlete to Thriving Entrepreneur. Um, and it came out a few months ago, April 2nd. So really appreciate you having me on, Meredith. This has been wonderful. I'm sure you and I could talk for hours about a lot of this
Good.
stuff.
I knew that would be the challenge when we started today was limiting it, but it's been just a great conversation. And Jay, I want to acknowledge you for recognizing where your gifts and talents were as a coach in helping these other athletes really because of your own journey, your own pain, as you mentioned, and what you've learned over the years, and now your willingness to give back and help others make that transition so they don't have to suffer or experience the pain like you did. I really want to encourage my listeners to get a copy of your book. I just know that every business leader will find really important information there that you can apply to your work right now. So thank you again, Jay, for being with me. It's been a great conversation.
This is great. Thanks, Meredith. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for tuning into my podcast. Now head over to growstrongleaders.com and check out the powerful tools we've created to help leaders strengthen their character and communication skills. Until next time, I'm Meredith Bell.